Welcome to Conversations on Living Awake. I'm Prajna, and today my guest is Rick Archer. Welcome, Rick.
Hi, Prajna, thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining us in this conversation. And what we're doing is we're taking a deep exploration of what it means to live awake. Some people call that embodiment. Some people call it enlightened living. You know, there's all kinds of terms. And I have some questions for you, but also let's start out with if you would speak a little bit about what your understanding is of this kind of new wave that seems to be presenting itself.
Sure. Well, it just so happens that coincidentally I was listening to the Reverend Matthew Fox this morning, who spoke at the last SAND conference, and he gave a talk about what he called the second axial age. And what he meant by that is that various thinkers and philosophers identified the kind of the period of the Buddha and Lao Tzu and those ancient sages as the first axial age, where there was a big shift in world consciousness. But the emphasis of those teachers tended to be liberation from the cycle of birth and death, and just sort of getting out of the human condition if possible and never coming back, you know? And it perhaps was symptomatic of the difficulties of living in a time like that, where you could suffer terribly and die of a toothache, you know? And these days things are a lot better. So anyway, Matthew's contention was that we're actually in the middle of another such shift, perhaps much more dramatic than the first, but one in which the emphasis is not on escaping from life, but rather living life fully, which I think is very much in tune with the themes of the things you talk about, but living it, in the divine in a human life.
Yes.
And enjoying human life in all of its facets, but with the sort of one's roots deeply into the divine, so that one is both human and divine at the same time. So anyway, I thought that was interesting that I just happened to come across that this morning. And feel free to interrupt me at any point with a question, but because once I get going, it's hard for me to stop. But personally, in having been interviewing people for the past 5 or 6 years, I've seen a trend which has been a shift from an emphasis on, I am not a person, the world is illusory, that kind of thing, to, yeah, I'm a person, I'm just not only a person. The personhood is one of the dimensions of my total being. And, I started out life thinking I was only a person, and then maybe I'm speaking in terms of like my typical interviewee, maybe I went through a phase in which I emphasized on I'm not a person at all, but now I realize it's a whole package, of unbounded awareness or consciousness or whatever you want to call it, and my individuality. And, as you know, a lot of people who kind of shifted into an extreme emphasis on a detached, impersonal, disembodied perspective, eventually that came around and kind of bit them in the ass in terms of things they had to deal with in life. And if they didn't deal with those things, then they began to behave irresponsibly or uncaringly and so on. So there just seems to be this kind of emphasis going on, this shift going on, in which people are kind of realizing that they have to sort of have a foot in both camps and integrate the two very thoroughly.
Right, like coming from...
They're not at conflict, but they're actually mutually supportive.
Yes, right. So you don't have to have just an absolute perspective or just a personal perspective. And
Right.
that's really what our program is all about. It's sealing the gap between what it means to have a realization, a very deep realization, and to be able to live that fully in your life. And when I first met Adyashanti, this is maybe something we can talk about, because you were getting to it about shadow maybe material. Like if something isn't dealt with, then it can kind of live as a shadow, and cause you to behave in ways that are irresponsible or unconscious, just going unconscious again, unenlightening yourself, so to speak. But when I had an awakening, as you know, when we had our interview long before I met Adyashanti, but what drew me to him was he spoke about dark nights. And then I was like, oh, finally, somebody is speaking about what I'm going through and many others. And what that did, it's almost as if that Buddha teaching that we hear sometimes, that life is suffering. And when I hear that, I hear it to mean life includes suffering. And so meeting Adyashanti and really going a little more deeply to explore that teaching, it allows us to have the fullness of our humanity, which sometimes is tragedy and sometimes involves a lot of feeling. And is this what you're talking about, really getting more into the body and the heart?
Yeah, I think non-dual realization, I think there are degrees and stages of non-dual realization. You can sort of have a non-dual realization which is actually quite preliminary compared to more profound non-dual realizations one could have. But that, what typically people first encounter as a non-dual realization, and sometimes mistake as the final phase in their development, is really just a milestone and a foundation for much greater possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And those much greater possibilities don't have to be thought of exclusively in terms of, suffering along with inner bliss or some such thing. Sure, we're going to go through that kind of stuff. I mean, Adya's father just died a few weeks ago, and he probably experienced all the normal human emotions that one would have if one's dear parent died. But I'm sure that in terms of his inner experience, he was not exclusively those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And he has this tremendous heart, which I haven't known him as long as you have, but when I see him now and interact with him, I just kind of have this profound sense of love just pouring out of him,
Mm-hmm.
And non-dual realizations, as some people seem to experience them, are not very heart-oriented. They seem a little cold and aloof.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that is partly too because over the past 50 years, I mean, the trend used to always be to go practice, your spiritual practice would happen in a remote kind of a place, like in some kind of distant land. And now here, in our postmodern day, it's happening in the middle of your family, in the middle of work, in the middle of relationships, in the middle of all of these things that perhaps the earlier masters, those that we respect and look up to, didn't have the same kind of life experience going on. Some did, of course.
Yeah, I mean, people were having families back then too, but I guess it was considered much more conducive to making real progress to just detach yourself from the world and not be caught up in all that stuff. And and there's still merit in that. I mean, you probably conduct retreats occasionally, and most spiritual teachers do, where people kind of get away from it all for a weekend or a week or something. So it's nice to sort of have a hiatus from the usual bombardment of things that come at us, but most of us aren't wired such that we're going to live our entire lives that way.
Mm-hmm.
And probably even 2,000 years ago, most people weren't wired that way. And so people who are really serious about spirituality, the fanatics, they join the monasteries, and others, I don't know. I mean, I imagine that, I know that Buddha and some other teachers had plenty of householder devotees,
Mm-hmm.
and must have been providing some kind of spiritual instruction so that they could live what they were living in the midst of, a worldly life. But there did seem to be a bias or an emphasis on, if you're really serious about enlightenment, you better forget about having a family or being involved in the world, because it's going to just be a trap for you. And I think that it can be, you have to act in accordance with your dharma, with your nature. And if your nature is to be in the world, then it's a trap not to be.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so one of the questions, it's a really common one that people wanted me to present to you, because you have interviewed so many different people. And there is, that old expression, and we still hear it, the world is an illusion, kind of an idea, or it's just your story. And all of these kinds of expressions that can often get handed to students. And sometimes they get really triggered by that, because at the same time they're feeling this tremendous compassion for a situation in their life. So, what would you say is the doorway as far as what you see happening for people to not? I guess what I want to get at is sometimes even just to believe that if it's coming, it sounds as if a person is abdicating their authority outside of themselves rather than moving into their own heart and trusting the feelings that are arising, which means to attend to the situation. That maybe yes, it's an illusion, and at the same time it's happening. So what do you say? What do you say to that?
Well, I probably could say a number of things to that. I think, human beings are like, all beings are like filters in a way, like lenses. And, obviously we each have our own perspective on the world, and there aren't, objectively as many worlds as there are beings. We each just sort of filter out what, our sensory and intellectual and emotional apparatus has us see. And somebody else is going to see things slightly differently, and a cow is going to see things very differently, or a bat or something. So I don't think that the universe was an accident, or that God, and I'm very comfortable speaking about God, as long as we understand God to not mean the bearded old mean guy in the sky who drops pianos on people just for kicks. But rather, all-pervading intelligence that is really the ultimate reality, and being the ultimate reality is really the ultimate substance of everything, including everything that we are. Mm-hmm. And that vast, unbounded, all-pervading intelligence is interacting within itself, apparently for a purpose. I mean, mm-hmm. We don't want to anthropomorphize it too much and attribute human qualities to that cosmic intelligence, but we do seem to see an evolutionary trend in the universe, and in terms of the development of more and more sophisticated expressions capable of self-reflection and self-discovery, such that ultimately God can live through instruments such as we. We're like the sense organs of the infinite. I think I'm probably straying from your question, but maybe I'm kind of getting it in the process. I just think that there's something very profound going on, that mm-hmm. The world is an illusion in the sense that we really don't see it. We don't appreciate it in terms of what it really is, and what a profound, wondrous mystery it is. Mm-hmm. We're just kind of seeing through a glass darkly, as the Bible says, and that when the lenses of perception, or the windows of perception, have been cleaned, to throw William Blake into the mix, we begin to see the world aright, and we don't see it as illusory. We see it as incredibly beautiful and a profound display of unfathomably great intelligence. Mm-hmm. So it's not something, in my opinion, to be dismissed or belittled or trivialized or any of that. It's something to explore more and more and more and more deeply, so as to culture our ability to appreciate it to a really profound, superlative degree.
Yeah, well, I like that perspective. I think it offers something that people can digest. And then, because also, often the answer can be that from the absolute perspective, yes, you could say the world is an illusion, and everything that comes and goes, because it comes and goes, and you want to have the attention on what's the constant. Yeah? So what, I forgot.
Physicists might say, okay, this looks like a pen, mm-hmm. but you're just not looking at it closely enough. If you get down to the molecular level, it's molecules of plastic and stuff. But if you get down to the atomic level, that bears no resemblance whatsoever to plastic. It's just little atoms. And if you go even deeper, you're 99.99999% empty space. And, yeah. and whatever still remains there that's particulate, if you go even deeper than that, that's not even particulate. It's just vibratory strings or something. So, and yet we perceive it as concrete physical stuff. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, you could say, okay, the world as I perceive it is an illusion, but that's just because I'm not sort of perceiving it deeply or clearly enough, which is not to say that an enlightened person is going to run around seeing molecules and atoms, but just that they would ultimately have the capacity to see the essence of things, such that when they look at the pen, they're appreciating the pen not only as a pen, but in terms of its essential nature, which is identical to their essential nature. And that's where real non-duality comes in that I was alluding to earlier. Not just a sort of an aloof non-duality that's separate from and the world, but a greater non-duality that incorporates both the absolute and the relative within itself.
Yes.
Includes all things.
So that it sounds like that's an invitation to allow everything to come close. So nothing needs to be kept at a distance. And then I think part of this new wave of what you were referring to is this, it's more heart-centered and compassionate. So so nothing needs to be dismissed or denied. Right. And as you were speaking, you're very good with quotes, and I can't remember who said this, but the idea of grist for the mill, you know, like what comes to us in our life can, when we do let it come up close, it can touch us, and we can feel the impact of it. And in a sense, what happens is our capacity is widened. I mean, I can only speak from direct experience, and I'm sure you can. I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't have a small to a major tragedy that happens from time to time in life. But when we keep it at a distance, we're just creating the sense of separation. You know, we're reinforcing it. But when we let it come in, we can feel the impact of it without needing to go into a story about it. We can actually unleash the story and I think that's what people are interested in. They're interested in really being fully engaged in a profound experience of living.
Yeah, Scott Kilby's been wanting to have a conversation with me sometime about what he has observed in terms of people actually kind of getting themselves into a bad psychological condition through this sort of pursuit of non-duality in just kind of an intellectual sense, which kind of pushes them into disassociation, you know, and it makes them unbalanced actually. So he often runs across cases of people who've gotten kind of into trouble because of that approach. And I think it relates to what you're saying in terms of pushing things away and renouncing and denouncing and, you know, detaching ourselves from the world rather than embracing, embracing it. And if we do believe or understand or experience to whatever degree that, you know, there is this sort of omnipresent, all-pervading intelligence conducting things, then nothing is arbitrary, nothing is accidental. And the stuff, you know, some people say the world is my guru. You know, so the stuff that's happening to us is happening for a reason. Not necessarily a reason that our intellects can grasp, but there's some evolutionary potential in it. And people have probably heard me say that I kind of regard the whole universe as one big evolution machine, and that there's a kind of an evolution, a force of evolution that is fundamental to everything, and that is fundamental to us, and such that the things that happen to us are in the best interest of our evolution, as difficult as they may seem. And if we can kind of regard them from that perspective, then it makes them easier to deal with, and it perhaps enables us to derive much greater advantage or benefit from the things that we encounter.
Yeah, I think that's really nice what you're saying, because it invites a kind of a relaxation, you know, a relaxation, and it sounds like what you're saying too is when we really understand our true nature, you know, when we really get that behind everything it's only one, I mean, ultimately, and that you don't have to see something as different or other than yourself. Right. And I really just love what you just said, because listening to you, I started to relax, because I think that also you can go the other direction. When we hear that there's a reason for everything, if we only hear that, we can forget that we can relax into this wide awareness, and we can go into trying to figure out what that reason is. You know what I mean? And try to connect all the dots. And I mean, that's fun, and maybe there's a purpose in that, I don't know. But the real relaxation is in remembering, you know, who we are behind all of it, and that nothing is in opposition to who we are. So how can we go wrong?
And even if we can't figure out a reason in some intellectual sense of why this or that happened, you know, if there's a sort of a trust that all is well and wisely put, and that, you know, that if we kind of take the long view, like, I think that the span of possible human evolution is really vast and is not limited to one lifetime. And even if one is awake, it's not limited to one lifetime. There's going to be more. And so that if we kind of, it cultures an attitude of patience and enables us to kind of be open to the evolutionary potential of whatever comes along. And of course, your life has been a profound example of that. I mean, you know, with your daughters and everything, and you know, that almost drove you to suicide, but you kind of managed to take it in stride, and are a living example of exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, I really believe there was a larger intelligence that intervened, and I think that if we, you know, for instance, I think there's a value, or not, maybe not a value, but to being in love with truth. You know, like when we're really a lover of truth, and that's what our interest is. Truth has us. It's like, you know, you can't get away from home for too long.
Right.
And I think that that's really what, if we can even just remember that there's this universal intelligence, and you already spoke this, that's happening all of the time, even when we're in forgetfulness. Yeah, and yeah, so we know a little bit about that story about me, but what I'm curious about, and this question came from our group, we'll have a large group of people watching this, and then of course it will be online, available to many people. So we understand from your interviews that you have had a long meditation practice. And in that meditation practice, or just in your life in general, have you come up against some real difficulties that you have found, you know, where you've applied something has come forth that has been useful? Whether, I don't mean that it needed to be like an extreme dark night, but you know, what have been your tools?
Well, you know, I learned to meditate when I was 18, and at that point I was a high school dropout who had been in jail twice for marijuana possession, and had, you know, pretty much become estranged from my father. My mother was in a mental hospital, and, you know, there's all kinds of difficult situations. And you know, within a couple weeks after I had learned meditation, I was arranging to get back into school. I went into a community college, and you know, I had been a high school dropout, and you know, I got a job, and, you know, my life really turned around. So there's kind of a contrast, because I had more or less hit bottom, but not as deep a bottom as some people hit.
It's all relative,
you know,
huh?
It wasn't pretty. And over the years, you know, I feel like there's just been a steady progress, but I've gone through all kinds of phases during those decades. Some of which I look back upon and think of myself as having been crazy for years on end. Like, just really, you talk about dark night of the soul. I never went into kind of a depression phase, or, you know, life is meaningless kind of thing. But, you know, there were times you go through all sorts of metamorphoses when you're on a spiritual path, as you know, and you can become very obsessive, idiosyncratic, you know, just kind of nutty in many ways. And so it's been a kind of a long process of becoming more and more established in pure awareness, if you want to call it that, and integrating that into relative life. And it's an ongoing process. I'm certainly a work in process, never finished as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if that answers the question, but those are thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah. Well, the question was certain tools or resources. Has it primarily been your meditation practice, or perhaps meeting particular teachers? Or I know you've read a lot and things like that. But and I also have to say, from having an interview with you, one thing that impressed me so much that I got is that you really have a very huge heart. You know, that I could feel. I would express things to you that it would kind of just pass through another person. But you had like really normal, real, human reactions, responses to what I was expressing. And I just felt that that was wonderful. It didn't get spiritualized. It didn't, you know, you didn't try to change it in any direction or make it sound better or different. And I thought, wow, you know, that's emotional maturity as far as I can see. I really sense that, and I feel that this wave that, although I feel many of us have been on it for a while, is really bringing us more to that place of the full allowance of the human feelings and the depth in which we can feel, because then we're going to have a response that comes from a clear place, you know, from clarity about what can we contribute to in this lifetime. You know, then it isn't just about my spiritual awakening. You know, it's really about humanity at large.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's that phrase from the 23rd Psalm, my cup runneth over. I think that people they go through a phase in their spiritual practice where it's all about me, you know, my routine, my practice, can become very narcissistic and selfish and whatnot. And eventually, and also that's usually associated with a kind of a strong seeking drive, like I've got to have this, and, you know, come hell or high water, and everybody else can be damned, I'm going for this. And I think once you reach a certain degree of fullness, the cup gets kind of full, then the seeking drive kind of drops off, and you don't feel like you're seeking anymore, but you're certainly exploring and you know, pursuing this with as much zeal as ever, if not more so. There's just not a sense of I'm not going to be happy until I reach it. There's contentment that's there, and you just enjoy the continuing unfoldment. And also, I would definitely not put myself up as some kind of example of someone who's emotionally mature, has a really great heart, or anything like that. I really feel like I'm, you know, a lump of coal compared to what's possible when you look at some of the really great hearts that have graced this world, and you know, people like Amma, or people who've, you know, Mother Teresa, or people who've just done, you know, wonderful things for humanity. Yeah, I'm just kind of a babe in the woods, and you know, doing what I can to further my evolution and be of some use in the world.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say, I mean, not to hold anybody up, because it's all kind of, how can you be in just the day-to-day, person-to-person relating? And I think that's, you know, if you can just do that much, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's really huge, and that comes across in your interviews and in what you're presenting to the non-dual, so to speak, community, you know,
well,
and beyond. And then still, though, what we want to hear is, what are your resources then? What are the tools that you use when you get in a stuck place, or, and maybe it doesn't happen that much anymore, but for the people that are listening that still have kind of that experience of you know, coming and going, or getting stuck, and or maybe really wanting to avoid emotions because, you know, it just feels too difficult.
Well, I heard an interesting phrase this morning. You know that saying that it's better to dig one deep hole than 15 shallow ones if you're trying to dig a well? Well, I think it might have been Thich Nhat Hanh or someone who said, yeah, but it might be okay to use 15 different tools to dig one deep well, you know? And so this idea that you should just pick one thing and stick with it no matter what, or else you're going to get, you're going to be a dilettante, you're going to get distracted. But, you know, so in my own case, I haven't had a wide range of resources. I, you know, was a TM teacher for 25 years, and these days my wife and I go to see Amma, and she's been tremendously helpful. I still meditate about 3 hours a day, and outside of that, you know, I don't have a lot of resources. I haven't done therapy. I do a little yoga, but I'm not heavy into it. And I know there are so many things out there that people can do, but in my own case, primarily it's just been meditation for me, and the benefits kind of spill over. So it's like if I'm met with a challenging situation at 3 in the afternoon, it's not like I have to mentally call upon something that happened during meditation in the morning to deal with this situation. The influence of it just sticks,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so it enables you to meet whatever you encounter as you go through your day.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that your awakening has become not like more body oriented, because in a sense, you know, truly there isn't a body, there's awareness. But would you say that you're relating to the body, you know, how you are in relationship to your body, your health, your work, all of those things have shifted as well over time?
More and more so. Again, a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of like that phrase that the body is the temple of the soul. And I kind of had this realization, again, when I was about 18, that with the track I was on, I had this realization that I'm stuck in this body. And if I damage it, I'm going to be stuck in a damaged body all my life. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start taking better care of myself. I'm going to learn to meditate, this and that. And so over the years, I've tried to, you know, keep the body healthy,
Mm-hmm.
eat properly, and exercise enough, and stuff like that, just to because it is our vehicle in life, and you want to take good care of it. I don't know if that's the sense in which you're referring to the body, but it's an important thing.
Well, it sounds like you're doing that, especially when I heard one time that you were cross-country skiing every morning or something like that.
Whenever there's snow, we don't get enough, but
Uh-huh.
whenever there's snow, I'm out there. And
Yeah.
and when there's no snow, I'm usually on my bike at least a few miles a day.
Hmm. Well, that sounds like a good place to end, you know, with the body being a temple and with all being a work in progress, and the idea that it's never ending. You know, this unfoldment is never ending, and that it's exciting that this wave of, call it compassion or, you know, bringing the human and the divine fully together is a beautiful thing. And I think you're contributing to that, and we all appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, I would say that even for people we hold up as, you know, exemplars like Ramana Maharshi or Papaji or whoever, it's never ending for them too. It's just my way of understanding things at the present time. Maybe I'll revise that understanding, but I just think that, as I said earlier, the scope of human evolution is vast, and there are probably beings in this universe that are so far beyond what any human being who is walking on the earth or has walked on the earth has achieved, that it's quite unimaginable. So, you know, it's, again, we're in it for the long haul, so just enjoy it. And there's kind of a balance between zeal and relaxation.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
integrate both of those things harmoniously.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot. Movement and repose is how Christ phrased it. Yeah, and I think too what you're saying there is also how it's important not to evaluate, you know, and compare, and to really stay out of that.
Exactly.
That, you know, it's really whatever our direct experience is really the one that matters.
Yes.
And
exactly.
that is not stagnant in the least.
Right.
Yeah. Well, super. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Know how busy you are, and it's been a delight. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Prajna. Let me know when the link is up.
I will. I sure will. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye.